Easter 1900. 45 meters down in the cold green dark off a speck of Greek rock called Antikythera, a sponge diver named Elias Stadiadis sees a field of corpses, rotting human bodies, dead horses, limbs twisted in the silt. He drops his weight belt and bolts for the surface, tearing off his copper helmet, shaking, half-drowned, babbling. His captain doesn't believe him, so the captain goes down himself, and he comes back up clutching a life-sized bronze arm. The corpses are statues, the horses are statues, and in the wreckage beneath them, unnoticed, lies an object that shouldn't exist, a machine, 2,000 years old, and working. The island of Antikythera is barely an island at all, a jagged smudge of limestone in the southern Aegean, halfway between Crete and the Peloponnese, a place sailors have feared for 3,000 years because of the way the wind funnels between the cliffs. In April of 1900, a sponge diving boat from the island of Simi, captained by a man named Dimitrios Kontos, was caught in one of those storms. They dropped anchor in the lee of the cliffs and waited. They were not the kind of men who waste daylight, even sheltering from a gale. The divers suited up in their canvas dresses and lead boots and dropped over the side to look for sponges. Stadiadis was the first down. What he saw at the bottom would change history. A Roman cargo ship sunk somewhere between 60 and 50 BCE had come to rest on a steep underwater shelf. The wooden hull was long gone, dissolved by 20 centuries of seawater. But the cargo remained: marble statues of Hercules and Apollo, a bronze Odysseus, the exquisite youth of Antikythera, a young man's body cast in bronze, his hand outstretched, glassware, amphorae, coins. The ship had been sailing west, almost certainly toward Rome, carrying looted treasure from somewhere in the Greek East, possibly Rhodes. Captain Kontos sailed straight to Athens and reported what they had found. The Greek government understood at once. They sent the Royal Hellenic Navy. And for nearly a year between 1900 and 1901, those Simiot sponge divers conducted what is now considered the first major underwater archaeological excavation in human history. It was brutal work. At 45 meters, the divers had only minutes before nitrogen narcosis began clouding their thinking. One man died of decompression sickness. 2 were paralyzed for life. They surfaced, bleeding from their ears and noses, and went down again the next morning. They hauled up wonder after wonder, and among the masterpieces, almost as an afterthought, they pulled up a corroded gray lump roughly the size of a hardback book. It looked like a rock, like nothing. They put it in a crate, alongside broken pottery, and shipped it to Athens. For nearly a year, that lump sat ignored in the basement of the National Archaeological Museum. Then in May of 1902, the museum director, Valerios Stais, was passing the fragments and noticed something strange. There was a wheel inside the rock, a gear wheel, with precisely cut triangular teeth, still razor-sharp after 20 centuries on the seafloor. He bent closer. There was another gear behind it, and another. This was, by every standard of the time, impossible. Gear-cutting machines of that precision were not supposed to exist before the late medieval period. The ancient Greeks had philosophy and geometry and beautiful pottery. They were not supposed to have machines. The academic establishment listened politely, smiled, and looked the other way. A German philologist named Albert Rehm proposed in 1905 that the device was some kind of astronomical calculator. He was ignored. The lump went back into the cabinet. The world moved on. Half a century passed. In 1951, a young British science historian named Derek de Solla Price came across photographs of the fragments and could not let them go. He spent the next 20 years of his life on this single object. In 1971, working with the Greek nuclear physicist Charalampos Karakalos, he wheeled the fragments under a gamma-ray source and X-rayed every one of them, all 82 pieces. The images came back, and what Price saw on those plates broke him open. There were not 3 or 4 gears in this machine. There were at least 30, interlocking, nested, differential, driven by a single hand crank. Price published his findings in 1974 in a monograph called Gears from the Greeks. He wrote, and the line is now famous, that it was a bit frightening to know that just before the fall of their civilization, the ancient Greeks had come so close to our own age, not only in their thought, but in their scientific technology. He dated the device to roughly 80 BCE, almost the exact moment the ship had gone down. Here is what the Antikythera mechanism actually did. It fit inside a wooden case the size of a shoebox, 34 centimeters tall, 18 wide, 9 deep. On one side was a small bronze crank. You turn the crank, forward to move into the future, backward to move into the past, and on the dials of the front and back faces, hands moved. The position of the sun through the zodiac, the phase of the moon's position in the sky, including the wobble of its elliptical orbit, calculated by a pin-and-slot epicyclic gear. That kind of differential gearing was supposed to have been invented in 16th century Europe, not on a Greek workbench in the time of Julius Caesar. On the back of the device was a spiral dial of 223 cells, one cell for each lunar month of the Saros cycle, the great Babylonian eclipse rhythm. Cells that predicted an eclipse were engraved with a tiny Greek glyph telling you whether it was solar or lunar and at what hour of the day it would fall. Below that was another dial that tracked the 4-year cycle of the Panhellenic Games, the Olympics, the Pythian, the Nemean, the Isthmian. This bronze box could tell you 2,000 years in advance when an eclipse was coming, where the moon would be that night, and which athletic festival would be opening that summer. In 2005, a team from Cardiff, Athens, and Thessaloniki, working with Hewlett-Packard and the British firm X-Tech Systems, shipped a 450 kilovolt microfocus CT scanner across Europe and rolled it into the museum in Athens. They scanned every fragment in 3 dimensions, and they found something nobody expected. Hidden inside the corroded crust, etched into the bronze, were thousands of Greek letters, a user manual. The oldest surviving technical instructions for a scientific instrument anywhere on Earth. The text described the dials, the cycles, even the color coding. A yellow mark, the inscription says, indicates a solar eclipse. And then in March of 2021, in the journal Nature Scientific Reports, the UCL researcher Tony Freeth and his team published the breakthrough. 2 numbers buried in the X-ray data, 462 and 442, turned out to be the planetary cycles of Venus and Saturn. Working backward from those, the team reconstructed the entire front face of the machine for the first time. It was a working model of the cosmos, the sun, a small golden sphere with rays, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, each on its own concentric ring, each moving at its mathematically correct celestial speed, all of them gliding through the zodiac in obedience to a single human hand turning a single bronze crank. It was the universe, in a box. In the 1st century before Christ, who built it? Nobody knows. The leading suspect is the school of the astronomer Hipparchus on Rhodes, who around 127 BCE was the first man known to have fused Babylonian eclipse arithmetic with Greek geometric astronomy, which is exactly the intellectual fingerprint inside the gears. Behind him stands a longer shadow. The Roman statesman Cicero, writing in the 50s BCE, describes 2 similar machines, orreries of sun, moon, and planets, that the Roman general Marcellus carried home as plunder from the sack of Syracuse in 212 BCE. Their builder was Archimedes. Think about that. Archimedes, killed by a Roman soldier, his machines carried back to Rome. And then, for 2,000 years, every history book told us the ancients didn't build things like this. But here is the part that should keep you up at night. The Antikythera mechanism is not a prototype. The gears are too refined. The inscriptions are too rehearsed. The design is too mature. This is a production model from a workshop that knew exactly what it was doing, which means there were others. Dozens, maybe hundreds of these machines sailing the Mediterranean, sitting on the desks of philosophers and kings, and every single one of them is gone, melted down for scrap, rusted into nothing, lost, and the wreck-off Antikythera is not finished giving up its dead. Since 2021, a team from the University of Geneva has been removing boulders the size of cars from the site. They réunissent